Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of This Is Your Captain Speaking. Today I have someone on, and I think myself and Dave go back a couple of years now at this point because I've worked in the space that he's focused on, and I actually work with a couple of other companies in the space that he's currently focused on as well. I've got David Raab, who's the founder of the CDP Institute. David has had some level of either consultancy experience for the past 35 years as he under Raab Associates, but also having worked at the Franklin Mint, for example, Vice President List Research, Vice President Business Manager at Gruner plus UR. So he's looking at me like that's a while back looking at the LinkedIn profile here, David. But since 2016, he's been the founder of the CDP Institute. And as I said, I've been working in the CDP space for a while now, so since 2015-ish myself. And it's been interesting to see the CDP Institute sort of come out of nowhere almost back then. And it was pioneered by yourself, David. I remember getting emails from you, hey, are you interested in joining for the CDP Institute? Way back when I was with Exponi, and I was like, who is David Raab and what are the CDP Institute? And then that's how our relationship started. And I thought it'd be really interesting to have you on just to hear about the Institute and all the things you're doing. It's been really great for me to see how the Institute has grown, because I think you've really fit into a space there where it was, I don't want to say ignored, but like it wasn't the category was growing and none of the larger analyst firms were paying it enough attention, and you seized the opportunity and went with it. That's how I see it. But would I be correct in that, David?
Well, we tend to feel the opportunity seized us. It's more about being in the right place at the right time than any grand strategic planning on our part. But one way or the other, it did grow. We will not say what was the cause and what was the effect, but it has been an amazing ride. I named the category, as you know, back in 2013, and then really nothing happened until 2016, when all of a sudden it did take off for reasons unknown. We founded the Institute at the same time, and it just continues to grow. So it's been fun.
So you're the category, you would call yourself a category builder then when it comes to CDP, right?
I think if anyone could do that legitimately, it would be me.
I don't disagree. Category build, though, is painful. So are you willing to share any of the pain that you've been through and trying to build out the category or try to build out the Institute? Has there been much pain that you can share even?
Well, I must say it mostly has been quite a delight, and I don't really think about too much pain, but certainly there have been frustrations. We can call it again. There was that gap between 2013 and 2016 when pretty much I was the only person talking about it. And so that was not frustrating, but it was interesting. And then what's been more recently, again, more frustrating than painful, is some of the same questions keep coming up. I had a session yesterday for the publishing industry, which was actually among the first industries. And the guy who put together a thing called demystifying CDPs. I'm like, what do we demystify? We're 10 years into this. How can this still be a mystery to these people? So that's been interesting to see just how long it takes for those things to penetrate. And then some of the more recent things, one of the issues with category building for sure is getting the definition straight. And we always pay a lot of attention to that from the start of, here's my definition of CDP, and it's very specific. It's on one slide. And I can say it to you, in my sleep and backwards, and probably in several languages by now, because we just kept hammering at that definition. And if you read the other folks, the definitions from the other analysts, of course, they wouldn't use our words, but it's pretty close. So we kind of tend to feel that we at least bent the arc in the right direction in terms of understanding of it, because it's a very easy concept to misunderstand, because it is so broad inherently that people say, oh, I have the customer data, I must be a CDP. Well, no, it's not really that simple.
Well, let's do this, because I think this is interesting, Dave, because I've worked at a number of organizations that have gone and said, oh, you know what, we're a CRM. Oh, you know what, we're a CRM plus execution. Oh, you know what we are now? Now we're a CDP.
Right.
I think there's plenty of. So let's start with this, okay? I'll ask you the question, like, what is your definition of a CDP? And then I'll go into are those companies, like when they were claiming to just change the lettering from CRM to CDP?
Right. Yeah. Didn't have to. Yeah. Only a couple letters changed. Well, all right. So the official CDP Institute definition, packaged software that builds a persistent unified customer database accessible to other systems. And that was a very carefully crafted definition to exclude a lot of other things. So packaged software excludes data warehouses and data lakes and other things that you don't buy, but you build for yourself, because they look a lot like the CDP. If you draw the diagram, you just take out CDP and put in data warehouse, the diagram doesn't change, but they are quite different. Persistent customer database. It means it pulls the data out of the other systems and stores it someplace. Because there are early on, and even still today, there are quite a few vendors who consider themselves CDPs or CDP Lite that said, we don't need to pull the data into a separate database. We'll just read it from the source systems directly. And I won't mention any names, but and it took them years to figure out that didn't work. We knew it didn't work, but they thought it should work and didn't. But it took a long time. All those vendors have now come around and built an external database. The unified bit, all sources, again, there are a lot of source systems that just take in some data, but not all data, or throw away data, like a DMP, for example, only takes certain data in, and it doesn't keep it for that long, and it summarizes it, aggregates it into a profile. That's not what a CDP does. Now, the reason that we have that definition in the final piece of it, just to finish it out, accessible to other databases, is important because there's a lot of systems that actually will build a unified customer profile, but then don't share it out. If you've ever tried to export data from a CRM system, it's really hard. A lot of predictive modeling systems or personalization systems would assemble the data, but only for their own use. They didn't share it out with others. So that was, a very carefully designed definition to make it easy to exclude other systems that kind of look like a CDP. And the reason, though, beyond that we chose those particular characteristics, because people expect to be able to do certain things with the CDP. They expect to do segmentation. They expect to do audience selection. They expect to do advanced analytics and advanced personalization. Well, that requires all of your data in one place. That requires pulling the data in from the distances and putting in a separate database so you can do things like track identity over time. That requires having that access to external systems so you can share it. So our feeling was, if we didn't have a very strict and straightforward definition, then people would buy systems that didn't meet that definition but call themselves CDPs. They would find they didn't do what they expected the CDP to do, and they would say, CDPs are not good. It's like, well, no, you didn't buy a CDP. We had to have a definition to be able to say to those people, no, you bought the wrong system. You didn't buy a system that met the definition. And guess what? It doesn't do what that definition makes possible. So it was fairly strategic, at least. I'm a jigsaw puzzle builder, not a chess player, so I don't think that far ahead. Look at details. And that's about as strategic as I get.
That probably didn't make you very popular amongst some of those bigger players that went from CRM to CDP overnight. Again, they will remain nameless, but I can imagine that was there was some interesting conversations had, probably, right?
Well, we respected each other's differences of opinion, which is all you can do. But as I said, they all came around eventually. So, I don't gloat, but I'll gloat a little.
You were right, basically, is what you're trying to say. How many people are you guys at the Institute now?
Well, our main metric is the circulation of the daily newsletter, and that is creeping up to 14,000 now. I think it's around 13,800, something like that. Been growing very, very steadily over the years. We started out, obviously with 0, and the Institute is now since 2016, so whatever that is, 7 years old. And kind of just creeps up a couple thousand a year. There are about 50 or so sponsors, give or take, 50 or so vendors out of 150, 160 companies that we have identified as meeting our definition.
Sure. And people that are working for the Institute, so yourself and how many others?
Well, we try to keep it small. We use a lot of freelancers and project managers and people like that. We don't really want to have a big organization.
Because you're being very humble, because I think, like, from where this thing has grown with so little resource, actually, because when I first met yourself, it was really just yourself and Susan that were doing quite a lot of the heavy lifting, and you've managed to grow it massively in terms of, like, all of those major vendors that we were talking about before that you had to have those disagreements with and say, hey, no, this is the line in the sand for what a CDP is. Now they're all working with you, they're all sponsors. So it's you're very humble on it, David, but I'm going to call you out and say that you've done a good job there, mate.
Well, thank you very much.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit around the world of CDP, because one of the things that we've spoken about before is like the hype cycle with CDPs. Because let's take retailers as an example. Every retailer and their mother wanted a single customer view. Of that, they still talk about it, but I don't know. It's not as I don't know if the hype is still as big as it was maybe 3 years ago. We were probably right at the peak of the hype, in my opinion, 3 years ago, maybe, right? And people were after CDP. I need a CDP. I need a CDP. They didn't even know what a CDP was. They invested in a CDP, no idea how to use a CDP or utilize a CDP. So that's one of the things that we've spoken about before. Is it getting better in terms of people's knowledge, in terms of how to use the CDP after they go and invest?
Well, yeah, that gets back to some of the frustrations. It's probably getting better. It's a little hard to know. But what I hear consistently from the vendors is people not knowing what to do with the CDP after they buy it is their biggest headache. Not that hard to sell a CDP, really, because it paints a beautiful picture. Oh, all my data in one place. What wonderful nirvana will this be? And I'll be traipsing through the meadows with money just dropping out of the skies. And, but in reality, it's actually work involved in these things. And we won't say what's on the floor of the meadow being dropped by all the little unicorns. So you actually have to do stuff. And a lot of people, they don't really know what to do with it because it takes a lot of skill to take advantage of this data. So they'll buy it and then they'll get frustrated. And sometimes they say they'll actually buy a system that doesn't do what they need it to do, but usually it does. We've done a lot of research into what separates projects that succeed quickly from projects that move slowly. We would never say fail, but let's just say succeed slowly. And the difference is organization. It's, did we get our marketing team involved early? Did we get our IT team involved early? Did we get our management involved early? Did we get people to understand what to do with the system? Did we train them on what to do with the system? Did we make sure we had all the other skills and all our other systems could connect to the CDP and take advantage of what the CDP builds? So that's still there. We at the Institute, actually, that's our big project, again, strategically for the last couple of years, is try to figure out what we can do about training. We're actually right now about to release a number of training courses, online training courses, which will have affiliated workshops, live workshops, that we hope will at least make a little bit more of a dent. And there are plenty of other people out there doing that, I'm pleased to say, as well. So that more than anything else, I think, has continued to be a problem. In terms of the hype cycle, actually, to Gartner's credit, they pretty much have called it right. It showed up quite early on the hype cycle. I think it showed up in 2016. And it kind of crept up, and now it's down the other, past the peak for sure. I have to double check the latest one if it started to climb up the plateau of enlightenment or whatever they call it. But they've actually had it about right. People pretty much understand what one does. They may not have my definition in mind, but they have some pretty reasonable idea of what it does, and they have some notion of what they can do with it. And then it's just a question of learning how to make it happen. And that's where we are, and that's an okay place to be. The good news, and the thing that I always say is, my legacy to the universe is there was always going to be a box in the diagram that had all your customer data, but we can now say that box will have CDP on it. So that's my accomplishment, is to put the label on that little box. Box will be there regardless.
Good. It is a big undertaking, right? Taking on a CDP. People probably underestimate that. And I think here's a theory that I have, right? And I want to run it by you, see what you think. Call me a conspiracy theorist, but there are so many vendors. So you've got your monsters and you've got your independent vendors, right? So you have your enormous cloud platforms, right? Let's call them the Salesforce marketing clouds of this world, for example. And then you've got your independent vendors, which could be companies, for example, like a company that we've worked with together recently on Extreme Push. But back in the past, we would have worked with Exponia. And there's many that play in that space. There's probably hundreds, right, that play in that space there. Now, those independent vendors are trying to sell to probably more exciting, fast-growing companies that are probably playing in this sort of mid-market space rather than within the enterprise space, because the enterprises are going to go with enterprise. They're going to go with the larger cloud platforms. Now, those mid-market, let's call them mid to upper mid-market, they may not have the teams or the right sort of change management style internally in order to implement a tool like a CDP. So the vendors are actually selling into this mid-market because they have to sell somewhere, right? People are taking it on and being like, we need this, give it to me now, without any proper planning, without really thinking through it, maybe having an implementation partner behind it, making sure that they're looking after all of the change management, as an example, making sure that the company, if it's a retailer, for example, that mainly has a brick and mortar presence that's going to an online presence, that there's somebody there to look after the digital transformation, etc. Right? Now, is that causing this problem of, okay, we've got the CDP, now what? Like, is that causing that problem because of that massive mid-market space?
So the question would be, is it worse in the mid-market than it is?
I guess elsewhere? So, yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, well, you've been around. I've never been inside a really big company that ran anywhere near as well as you would have expected a really big company to run, right?
So they're all a mess. They're a mess.
They're all a mess. They're all, so like, are they really any better at change management than the mid-sized guy? That would be an interesting debate, but let's just say it's not self-evident to me that's the case. What you do see at the really large companies is that they have their tools in place that they're used to using. They're using Salesforce Marketing Cloud or whatever tool they're using, Marketo. And they like that, and they're not going to change that. So that all they want from the CDP is the data side. So they're more likely to buy a CDP that builds customer profiles and doesn't do the other stuff. The other stuff being the analytics, the personalization, even the message delivery, whereas a product that's tailored to the mid-tier, like an Exponia, had all those capabilities. I think it even started out as an email tool, if I remember correctly. So those are more of a complete solution that you can kind of airdrop in to your organization. Maybe you get rid of your existing email engine because you're not that married to it anyhow. And maybe even your web personalization tool you're not that excited about. So those organizations will take those more broad solutions, which are much easier to deploy, right? You don't have a lot of connections to do. You're getting it from one vendor. There's, kind of one throat to choke, one round of training to get through. So that has tended to be the big difference in the mid-market, is they've been much more interested. And we saw recently, actually we've seen for a long time now, when we segment the market of CDP vendors, we classify the CDP vendors based on whether they just do the data part, or they do the data and analytics, or the campaigning, or the delivery. And from remembering the number, it was only 17% of the industry just builds profiles and nothing else, which is, again, what my definition says. Pretty much everybody else is doing that plus analytics, and most of them are doing some sort of a marketing execution or activation set of functionality as well. And that's where the market is going. The market is buying those broader scope things because there's more mid-sized companies than big companies, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if that really answers your question, but there definitely is a difference in what they want. And the reason the mid-sized companies do is because they do have fewer resources. So the integration is much more painful for them, not because their systems are more complex, because they're actually less complex, but because they don't have the people to do it. So they're more interested in having one system that just does everything and minimizes that deployment. But they still have to do the training. They still have to do the planning. They still have to do all that stuff, which, again, they're not necessarily the best at. For
sure. That's interesting, but just 17% of just offering the CDP capability. And that actually makes sense in a way that that 17% is probably representative of the enterprise level.
Yeah, that's going to be more concentrated in the enterprise space for sure.
Yeah. Very interesting. Very interesting. So what do you see coming next from a CDP perspective? What's important? Look into your crystal ball. What do you see happening?
Well, we see a lot of interesting things happening. Real time, which we used to think was sort of peripheral, in the last couple of years has become absolutely critical for CDP. We actually have added it to our little checklist of things that you must do to be considered a CDP. This would be a good time to mention we actually have a certification program that compares vendors to a checklist of 7 things, real time being one of them. Again, helping the market to understand who's a player and who's just a pretender. So that has become very much more important. What we're seeing now, which is very interesting, is even though we feel certain data does need to be pulled out into a separate CDP database, there's more and more interconnection between the CDP and other data stores that gives the CDP access to data without pulling it in the CDP database. That could be an existing data warehouse or data lake. It could be an external system like something that's tracking the weather, in a given region, which is important, but you're never going to import directly because you only need it when you need it. Inventory levels, again, you would not pull that into the CDP, but you might well want to have it available for a retailer, say. So that very sharp line that we drew about persistent data has become a little fuzzier. Not that you still don't need it, but perhaps you can split it up a little more than we used to. So and we're now seeing the vendors build many more connectors for that. We're seeing, talk about frustration, the build versus buy debate rear its ugly head. We thought that dragon had been slain, but it seems to be coming back, more like Hydra than a dragon, I suppose, with many heads. And again, there are certain conditions where it makes sense for you to build your own CDP. Usually, if you're a big company that already has most of the pieces in place, then there's only a few little things you need to add. Okay, you could extend your existing systems, but we see a lot of companies that really try to build kind of everything. And the reason that happens is they don't know what they're getting into. CDP is just a database, they say to themselves. And we build databases all the time.
Are you seeing that in any specific industry, David? Because I've come across that in one specific space.
I don't know. I'd be interested to hear which space. Yeah, we see it everywhere.
Retailers, the giant retailers.
Okay.
And I've come across this often in that they would have their own product team that would basically be building that tool that we spoke about before, the CDP plus the execution piece. They would build their entire system. And what they would do is they'd come on demos, they go kick tires of all the vendors, understand, okay, what's the interface, what's the UI look like, how is that working, how's this working? Basically get into a full sales cycle and then say, oh no, we're not interested. Oh, yeah. And then they go away and they implement it on their own there. And every time you can see them coming. I know 3 or 4 companies, they're giants. There's one in Germany in particular. I'm not going to mention any names, but they always build before buy. And when I see them coming, salespeople that are unfamiliar with it, they think, oh, here we go. And I say, no, stay away from their waste of time. They're just going to use it. They're going to build their own. So, yeah.
Well, I think that's a big company thing. So actually, it's been interesting. Retail was relatively early strong adopter, but the other industries that traditionally were very data driven, which would be telco and travel and financial services, really were late adapters for CDP. And I think it was because precisely their existing systems were fairly mature. They actually had pretty good customer data management already. They didn't do what a CDP did. So they say, well, we do identity resolution already. We have to. We're a bank for money laundering and stuff. We have to do that. The telcos say, well, we already have all of our customer data, and there's tons and tons of it, and moving it into a separate system would be disastrous. It would be too hard, and then we have high security issues anyhow. So those industries were quite slow to CDP because they had a better chance of building, because they had big IT teams. Is the other thing they all have, right? So they do have the resources. Whether they really understood what they were getting into, we don't know. The marketing traditionally, certainly in financial services and telco, not the highest priority, maybe a little more so in hospitality. Well, even hospitality is very operations driven. So the marketers are always kind of second-class citizens. So even though the IT guys understood their data and had a lot of the pieces in place, they didn't necessarily understand what marketers really needed. And it's like any other system, you design it for a purpose. So you could have the best product information system in the world. You can have the best flight scheduling system or reservation system in the world. But if it's not designed to give marketers what marketers want, which is just a different view of that same data, it's a lot of work to get there. And if your people don't understand kind of what the marketers were needing or aiming at, it takes even longer, and it looks simple until they get into it, and then it drags on. And so we hear many tales of people who took 2 or 3 years before they realized it wasn't going to work.
Do you guys go in and consult with organizations on the prospect side, if somebody's, or prospects on the buyer side, if they're going and implementing a CDP? Do you guys go in and consult there, or is that something that you guys keep out of?
I don't personally do any consulting, or the Institute doesn't do any consulting anymore. I spent, as you mentioned, you mentioned some numbers.
A few years.
Yeah, we try not to mention specific numbers, but I spent a lot of time as a consultant doing exactly that. We have affiliated consultancies, so if that question comes in, I'm always happy to chat with somebody for half an hour because it's interesting to me and kind of get them pointed in the right direction. But if they need serious consulting, we'll hand them off to somebody else who does that for a living.
Got it. Okay. There's an interesting thing I wanted to pick your brain on, actually, and see your thoughts on it. I'm seeing, and I have been seeing this for a number of years now, in that larger brand houses like that operate in the FMCG space. So, for example, Nestle, Kraft, Wrigley, Mars, etc. Right? I'm seeing them show interest in customer data platforms, and they have been for a number of years, but they haven't been making any type of decisions on it. And I'm seeing the people that are interested in looking at CDPs are typically digital transformation people. Now, looking at these brands, they sell nothing online. Like when have you ever gone to Wrigley's website and go, hey, I'm interested in learning more about chewing gum, for example, just as an example, right? You go through the store, you take all that, you go and buy it in your store or whatever, and then that's it. Is a CDP interesting to them, or why would a CDP be interesting to them? Or are they more in the market for something like a DMP, right?
Well, there's been a lot of interest in that group in CDP recently. And the reason is they are trying to build direct relationships with their customers. If you go to the Wrigley website, I'll bet you can sign up for the newsletter, have a chew, whatever the hell they call it.
If it's not called that, we need to get in touch.
Right, we'll trademark it immediately. Partly because they're worried about third-party data becoming less available, so they want to be able to reach out to some people. Partly because the people who are going to go and sign up for the Wrigley, newsletter are, super fans of Wrigley. They're like totally into Wrigley gum or for whatever the hell they're into. So those people are, influencers. We must use the term, right? So there's a lot of leverage in helping those people to become more advocates for the brand. So there's considerable more value than just, let me sell you a pack of gum. Although I think most of those places now, you probably can actually buy the product online as well, or there'll be special edition, Wrigley's gum sold at 6 different baseball parks, or I have no idea, how you market Wrigley's gum, if it's even, are they even independent still? But whatever it is, doesn't matter. There actually is a lot of interest in building direct relationships, and that's what pushes them to CDP. I think there have been some deals cut. I have to double check, but I'm pretty sure at least a few of them have, in fact, because, back to your comment about the retailers having giant IT departments, those manufacturers by and large are pretty light in that regard. And certainly when it comes to managing customer data, they don't have any experience because they've never done it before, but now they need to do it. So they know they need outside help.
Yeah, I think also with COVID has sort of sped this whole thing up as well.
Oh, yeah.
This digital transformation.
Yeah, no, COVID pushed a lot of these guys to do stuff online. You look at Nike, for example. It was a great example, right? They used to only sell through, other companies, but now they're like a totally direct to consumer focus.
Same with Apple as well. No, super interesting. It's very interesting where this is going to go. So yeah, no, it's something to keep an eye on. David, we've come up to time now, mate. Where can people find you? www.cdpinstitute.org. I really need to put a sign up on the wall behind me. You need to have a big in lights behind you, David.
Yeah, I'll work on that.
Good. Dave, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you again today. Thank you so much for taking the time out and having a chat.
Always fun, Andy. Take care. My pleasure.
Absolutely. Guys, this has been another episode of This Is Your Captain Speaking. We will see you again next week for more exciting content. Thanks, David.
Thank you.